panelists, Mr. Balakrishna Pishupati, Country Head, UNEP India, and Ms. Seema Arora, Deputy Director General, Confederation of Indian Industry. May I welcome you to the dais. I would like to hand over to Ms. Arora to take the conversation forward.
Thank you, Shrajamoy. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this final session of the CII-ITC Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development 20th Global Sustainability Summit. And thank you for joining us today. I am very, very pleased to warmly welcome our guest today on the panel, Mr. Balakrishnan, who is the head of UNEP in India. I have had the pleasure of knowing Mr. Balakrishnan for a long time. In fact, when he was very closely working in the United Nations, New York headquarters, we had actually worked together on the biodiversity COP that happened in India in 2012. So I know that he's so passionate about this subject, has tremendous experience on this topic, and therefore we are fortunate to have you, sir, for this final session of the summit. Through this session, basically, I thought we'll keep it a conversational session with your permission, because I think there's been a lot of, discussion that has happened for the last 2 days, close to 2 days, which has been very interesting. Just to give you an idea of what we have been, discussing, of course, the whole theme of this event, as you know, is reimagining sustainability and reimagining it from different lenses of regeneration, from responsibility, from resilience, and therefore we had different sessions on these themes. But we had the fortune of having 3 of our ministers, union ministers, address us, and so we got some very good messages from the government on the policy side, how they're looking at the whole area of sustainability. Then we also had, sessions around specific themes, and again the themes, of course, with the lens of industry, but also from understanding of how they are viewing the challenges and the opportunities. And I'll take some of those themes as we do the conversation, but maybe I can start with just saying that what we heard from our 3 union ministers on how India is viewing sustainability going forward, even as we see a lot of headwinds. The whole idea is that we are reimagining sustainability, but there are huge amount of headwinds that we see. The largest country, or one of the most important democracies, has walked out of the convention, as we know, and the European Green Deal is undergoing a lot of changes. But what we heard from our government was that the focus on sustainability stays. While India is growing, and we have had very good growth numbers, as you know, in the last quarter, we have surpassed the growth numbers of the previous year's same quarter. And we will continue to put that focus on growth. We will also keep similar focus on sustainability. That was exemplified. But I do want to hear from you, as you from UNEP India, how you're viewing India's position. What are you seeing from there as India's at that level? And maybe the audience would really benefit from your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to all of you. Let me first thank CII for the invitation. Certainly, it's not very common that we have these kinds of congregations of the industry coming together to discuss issues like sustainability. And in fact, as you are mentioning about the overall theme of this particular session, is very much aligned to the session of the UN Environment Assembly that is going to be happening in Nairobi in December, where we'll also be looking at the next 4-year program cycle of the UN Environment Program. And very heartening to hear about this particular reinforcement of not just the commitment, but the belief that sustainability stays. But of course, the word sustainability, certainly in as much as it is understood and used, also means different things to different people. When you talk of sustainability to the industry, it's different. When you talk of sustainability to a policymaker, it's different. When you talk of sustainability to a common man on the ground, to a farmer, to a housewife, to a youth, each person understands the word sustainability differently. And the reason for it is, to an extent, they connect with that word much better. The way we want, for example, if I'm working for UNAP, the way I understand sustainability is certainly different from the way perhaps the youth will understand. But the common element that connects all of us is, what is that we can do to ensure that tomorrow is better than today? We do not destroy what we actually, what is called the intergenerational equity part of it. Many of you would have heard this particular phrase, that we inherited this planet from our forefathers and we should be responsible citizens to hand it over, if not in a better way, at least in the same way as to our grandchildren. So certainly that element of reinforcing the confidence that sustainability will underpin development is something which is extremely progressive. Because gone are the days, because some of you probably would realize 50, 60 years ago, there is this very famous saying that poverty is the worst form of pollution. So we actually have come a whole cycle in terms of understanding how people relate, how sustainability, environment relate to development. It's no more the conversation of is it environment or development, but it is environment and development. It is sustainability and development. A number of commitments made at different levels, ranging from household levels, because there can't be, better citizens of the world than we Indians, where we can say sustainability is a part of our ethos, it's a part of our culture, it's a part of our day-to-day living, to the global commitments countries and heads of state have made under the Sustainable Development Goals. So certainly a number of things have happened, and the number of, commonalities of, even though the approaches towards sustainability may be different, but the end goal that everybody wants to achieve, what they want to achieve in their individual lives, communities and collectively, is something which actually have a lot of similarities and a lot of connects. So that's why it's very heartening to see that element, that sustainability is here to stay, irrespective of, we're not looking at the numbers in terms of economic growth, we are not only talking in terms of the percentages of GDP, which is going up or stagnating or going down. But at the end of the day, the element of it is that tomorrow is more important than today when it comes to environment. And that is where the sustainability discussions comes into play, very, very important and a major role.
Absolutely. I think you raised a couple of very good points, and especially the point that sustainability means different things to different organizations, institutions. And I think that is very relevant, because if we talk of industry, sustainability means environmental sustainability, but also means, economic sustainability. Because I remember conversations with business leaders that unless I have the economic muscle, I cannot invest in improving my sustainability, ecologically or social sustainability. So I think that's very important. I also want to a lot of, this is a global sustainability summit. So we had a lot of, global partners joining us, and global partners also coming in with, ideas on what India could do, ideas on what industry could do. They were also, there have been suggestions that, how India could probably, advance its entire, we have a 2070 target, as we know. And there were conversations that can India actually do it before? Is it practical? And I think one of the questions I also wanted to, maybe get your views on was that, what do you think about, India's 2070 goal? And also we know that a lot of money is required to achieve this 2070 goal. So, do we have the money? Where will this money come from? Can India get this money? What should we do to attract more money? So this is what I would like.
Thank you. It's quite, both a pointed and a philosophical question. What do we do to do better? What do we do to do things, differently? But if there is one thing I should say, having again lived outside India for a number of years, but then been in India for the last 9 months or so, every day is inspiring for me individually, personally. The reason for it is that this is one country where unfortunately we still have not optimized the way we wanted to capture, or we want to quantify creativity. The amount of creativity that happens in India, I can very confidently say, not just because of the number of the people in the country, but also the diversity and the scale and the depth of the creativity is something which is mind-boggling. I think we still have not optimized the best way to capture what that creativity means, not just for sustainability, but also for development. So the first element of it is that it's actually a hotbed of creativity. But what normally happens in that kind of a situation is that how do we scale up creativity to innovation? That's where the investments comes into play, a very, very important role. And a lot of you have an important role to play in terms of innovations and consolidating. But if there is one challenge, if personally I would say that I've observed in terms of ensuring that creativity and the innovation is having an impact at the local level, at the subnational level, and the national level, and subsequently at the global level, is a bit of a road that we still need to cover in terms of how do we aggregate, how do we consolidate that creativity and innovation. I think that is something which is very, very critical for India. A lot of things are written about startups, a lot of things are written about investments, a lot of things about the positives elements, the challenges, shortcomings, all of it. But if there is, to me, one thing that India can potentially invest, it is how do we aggregate, how do we consolidate that creativity and innovation that really can make a much larger impact than what it is now. Related to that are the investments, because there is no one country on this planet, however great your GDP is, that can say we have enough resources to do everything what we want to do. All of us are having our own challenges in terms of where we want to invest, what are our priorities, how do we work at national development. But when it comes to finances, which is also one of the elements of your question, today when it comes to environment, when it comes to sustainability, the demands for investments into sustainability, environmental management and governance is ever increasing. You ask anyone in any Ministry of Environment and Forests, any government, to say how much of reporting, how many commitments that each of the governments across the world has. We are running into dozens of commitments that countries have made in terms of ensuring that they do things right. The Climate Convention, the Biodiversity Convention, the Desertification Convention. I mean, there are dozens of these kinds of multilateral processes where countries have committed to. So the amount of commitments and the amount of responsibilities for countries to implement those commitments. Remember, any of these global discussion, the decisions are global, but the responsibility to implement the decisions are always national. That is the nature of the international environmental law. A COP decides on something. The expectation is that the contracting party to that particular convention will take measures to implement the convention at the national level. So one of the critical elements is that the responsibilities are increasing, but the amount of resources are either stagnating, and in many cases, they actually are also decreasing. So the fundamental challenge there is to ask a very basic question in economics. What's the best return I can get for the dollar invested? And that is where we still have not optimized our approaches or answers to that question. Today we talk of climate finance as if it is completely independent of nature finance. Today we have finances or financial requirements raising resources for example, oceans, or for example, land degradation, pollution. Each one of them, to an extent, is siloed to the extent that they have become sector-specific. I think one of the critical elements that a country like India can start take a leadership role in is on how do we integrate the approaches and principles of environmental financing. You know, there is no way we are going to get the resources required. I mean, if you look at climate finance investments that are required in a country, we actually have seen numbers from $1.5 trillion to $2.5 trillion that is required for a country like India to actually make the investments to go, green, to actually meet all the climate change obligations. So the critical element is that how do we integrate our approaches and principles so that for the dollar invested, we get the best possible returns. Move away from just only looking at the climate benefits, only looking at nature benefits, only looking at land degradation benefits. Look at the common benefits or the co-benefits, as we call it, that can be achieved. So that is very, very going to be fundamental in the way the transition is going to happen when it comes to financing, environmental financing. I'm not talking about sectoral financing, I'm talking of environmental financing part of it. But for that, there are two very critical requirements. The first requirement is that for those of you who follow the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD, one of the three conventions that was born out of the Rio Convention, along with the Climate Convention and the Desertification Convention, in 2022, when we had the Conference of Parties, that actually countries have decided for themselves to set 23 global targets in terms of achieving the conservation agenda, conservation, sustainable use of resources, and sharing the benefits of the use. We actually have seen an unprecedented participation of the private sector, especially financing institutions. We had 3,500 institutions coming from the finance and investment background in Montreal, where the Conference of Parties was held. And subsequently, at UNEP, when we did an assessment of, and the countries also decided on two specific targets, one specific target on financing and one specific targets on the role of private sector and industry in sort of achieving some of those targets or some of the elements of the targets. But then after 2 years, subsequently in 2024, there was another meeting at the Conference of Parties held in Cali, when we did an assessment of how much of those commitments have actually been realized when it comes to investments. One very clear message that came out of that particular discussion, especially a discussion between the policymakers and the private sector, financing institutions, multilateral development banks, and others, was that it is not about our ability or inability to raise the resource, but it is the predictability, it is the transparency, and it is also the ease with which a country will be able to put in place an enabling policy environment that can help the investments flow. And that, unfortunately, seems to be still a bit of a challenge in many countries where there is potential for investments to come in, but in the absence of having a very clear, very predictable, and very forward-looking enabling environment, a policy environment, regulatory environment, investments are always going to be a challenge. But having said that, a number of initiatives in India, which certainly India need to feel proud that they can take to the world. But of course, given the size and the opportunities in a country like India, the opportunities are many. We are not looking at a tenfold increase of the investments or the results of the impacts of the investment, but we are looking at hundreds of times of these investments going. Is that how do we maximize that? And how we can actually create that policy and the enabling environment in a country where the investments and the finances can start flowing in. So it's a combination of things, creating the policy environment, enabling environment, looking at different approaches to dealing with environmental finance, and lastly and importantly, investing in where it has to be invested in terms of the time. Many times that has always been a challenge. Some time ago I was working as the chairperson of the National Biodiversity Authority, and then we did an assessment of how much India actually works on issue of coastal and marine resources, which was one of the topics for the COP in Hyderabad in 2012. And then when we did an assessment, one thing which really struck us was at that time, we were able to capture 128 institutions in India working on coastal and marine resources, funded by 4 ministries. And then when we asked what is the baseline on which India is going to present elements of a ministerial declaration, the answer was that, we still are working on a baseline. So the difficulty is not about the amount of money you have. Many times, having worked for a number of years, including at the UN, we sort of always say that we need more money. But I know how difficult it is to spend the money. So it is not so much of money that you have, but where do you invest? What is the kind of investment? What is the timing of the investment? Who do you invest with? Who do you invest for? How do we actually look at the key performance indicators of those investments? Some of these things have to be redefined in 2025, 2030, 2045. And in terms of the timeline, certainly, I always say, India many times shies away from overcommitting, but then over-performing and delivering. And we already have seen the Secretary General launched a report a couple of months ago, where very clearly when we talk of India, we say the second, the third, the fourth, whatever is the number in terms of the emissions. But then there is another dimension to that, which is a positive dimension, that India actually is the third largest, country with the largest amount of renewables that have been, put on the table. We have achieved it much before the timelines that we have set for ourselves. So what is important is that it is not just to look at the opportunities that are there, but it's also to translate those opportunities to actual things on the ground that will have an impact. And that is why, in as much as we want to have national, global conversations on some of it, it is important to have the local conversations, because that is where a lot of things will matter. And in terms of sustainability, that is where the change has to start.
Thank you again. I think many points. Of course, I just want to maybe do a follow-up question with you on the siloed approach that you mentioned, and the need for integration, As much as India can integrate probably, an approach or a finance-structured approach to these different topics of climate or nature or biodiversity or desertification, the global architecture is fundamentally siloed. So is there a case for the global architecture to also look at it in a different manner? Do we have to reimagine the global architecture of these, multilateral agreements so that they talk to each other? They're not looking, one is looking that side and the other is looking the other side. So how can we do that? And also, while India as a nation can do that, but then would it be possible for India to navigate if the global architecture doesn't talk the same language? So that's the question I have.
Thank you. On many of these, you don't have to wait for a mandate. You can take the mandate and run with it. We don't have to have a global mandate to work on synergies and to work on cooperation and elements of it. But having said that, there are two dimensions to that particular question. See, to an extent, when you talk of all of it, it's correct to say that who actually makes the decisions in these intergovernmental processes? It's not UN, it's not CII, it's not the industry, it's not the civil society organizations. These are the governments. So essentially, when a decision is made at an intergovernmental multilateral process, it's the governments that make the decision. And remember, a number of decisions related to environment, related to sustainability, are even today, thankfully, consensus-based decisions. Very complex. That is why you see many of these negotiations going for up to midnight, next day morning, and maybe 2 days later, extension of the, concluding session to have a decision on it. So having said that, the first element of it is that the countries actually need to come together and decide on where the priorities are, because essentially decisions are made by the countries. Whether to have 20 targets or 23 targets or 15 targets, our decisions are made by the countries. That's the first part of it. The second part of it, just about a few days ago, we actually have concluded the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Meeting in relation to preparing for the Environment Assembly coming up in December. It was held in Fiji, one of the Pacific Island states. And an agenda, for example, as UNEP we are working, but globally a number of organizations are working, reinforced by Japan, was asking for a renewed commitment from the Environment Assembly. When I say renewed commitment from Environment Assembly, renewed commitment from the member states, that countries will work synergistically and will ensure that even though the mandates, the decisions related to some of these are coming from various different processes, implementation will have that connect. Implementation will have that synergy and coherence. If you take the investments that are coming in for many countries, not essentially a big one for India, but for a number of countries, the Global Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund are the two major sources of multilateral support for a number of countries. One thing that has now been clearly said as a fundamental enabler for both the Global Environment Facility and the Green Climate Fund is to have policy alignment and coherence at the national level. So certainly a number of ideas have been put together. These are not new, because I've started working on synergies across the multilateral environmental agreements almost about 15 years ago at UNEP. But then what happens is that the proof is in the pudding. You can't look at synergies as a decision at a COP. Synergies has to happen at the action level on the ground. That is where the investments, that is where countries need to actually create that space and create that governance system where policy alignment and policy coherence will be fundamental to a number of these activities that we do to implement, to realize many of these objectives or these aspirations we have.
I think that's a fair point, that even if the countries are deciding at a global level, the implementation can be coherent, and I could not agree more. I want to bring in a final point before maybe we can ask if somebody has from the audience, and that is, we heard even in this summit, and we have in the past also talked about the whole idea of how consumers actually need to, or how can we actually influence consumers more. And as we sit in CII, the industry body, we also take this quite seriously, that industry has the power through their products, their services, experiences that they offer every day. They can influence the way citizens and consumers make choices. Even if it is B2B, you can influence if you're a buyer, and if you're a consumer, you can. And the responsibility is also to inform, right? And I know that, there have been conversations in the past where I have been involved with the UN also, where this has also been a topic that you have had certain views on. So I just wanted to, give you a chance to say, how could maybe CII work more? How could industry work more? What could we do to make our partnership more purposeful, which is what the session is all about, to maybe achieve this objective as well?
Thank you. Very important point. I mean, in terms of influencing consumers, influencing the society. I was just talking to one of my friend and colleague. I said that if there is something which I would definitely like to do in India, as quickly as possible, is to actually look at the possibility of having a national summit of advertising companies for environment. I said, so many summits, why do you have to have another summit with advertising? I said, they are the best communicators. From a safety pin to a rocket, they can sell to the consumer in 10 seconds, 2 words, 3 words flat. So the first element of it is what we communicate, how effective we are in communicating. Today, it's not about messaging. It is also about who is actually giving the message. The reason why everything is related to influencers and influencing today is because that is where people are actually looking for answers, looking for support and elements of it. And if there is one thing, again, working for UNEP in India, that I'm personally interested in, we've already started looking at some small investments into that. We can have the best possible laws, regulations, rules, frameworks. You can have all the money on this earth. You can have the best institutions. You can have the best science, best experts. But if the individual behavioral change doesn't happen, none of it is going to make an impact. You can't say we have the best sewage treatment plant when everybody is dumping waste onto the river. So the fundamental element of any of the change, environment or sustainability or development or even our future livelihoods, it's going to be on how we are going to be influencing behavioral change. But for a lot of us, when you talk of behavioral change, many of us fail to understand that behavioral change is not just organizing one workshop, a training program, putting a poster, coming up with a playbook to say how different things are. There is a whole lot of science behind cognition and behavioral change. And that is what we want to invest at UNEP, is that how can we actually have a structured program that can bring in that behavioral change at the individual level. But when you come to consumer choices, we actually have, to an extent in India, flipped the coin. I always say we Indians are very cost conscious. I was reading a very nice cartoon some time ago, which was, celebrating ISRO's launch of a satellite. And the cartoon said somebody asking a scientist in ISRO, saying that how many kilometers per liter? It's a very interesting, way of looking at things. So the fundamental element of consumer behavior and change will come because we have to now shift from one fundamental element of consumer choices, which is convenience. Because if you take plastics, for example, it was a great invention. It became almost inevitable but it has now become an illusion. So we are so addicted to plastics that our lives are so sort of intertwined with the use of it, we actually have challenges. So what can the industry do? Given the ability, especially in a country like India, where the consumer choices are now getting more informed, more finessed, more refined, day by day, and these are not only the youngsters who are, the Gen Z or Gen Alpha or whatever it is, across the age groups. Can we do something where it's not about the informed choice, but about choices that actually are willing to make that small investment to the future? I was just talking to you just a few minutes ago before we came in, that we organized a meeting of a few of the industry leaders on the plastics challenge, because this year, the World Environment Day, the theme was how do we end plastic pollution, how do we reduce plastic pollution. A lot of discussions about a number of things, starting from wrappings to reducing use to alternates, to a lot of composting related innovations that are happening and all of it. But then the biggest challenge, to an extent where a lot of us are still unable to find a suitable intervention to deal with it, are the small packets and the sachets. Great intervention in terms of ensuring that the consumers are able to access things. Maybe, when this entire sachet revolution happened, it was about reaching to the last man, reaching to the person who needs it but unable to afford a larger packet of it. But today it has started to hit us so badly, the multi-layer packing. Today, is there anyone collecting this? No. Is there segregation options? No. Are there enterprises related to actually looking at how do we recycle, how do we reuse this? No. And if there is, of all the things, one of the things that really is creating flooding in cities, even at the level of villages, is the choking of the drains, and many of them caused by these sachets, which are not collected, which are thrown away, which are going to be there. So one of the questions we asked was, is there alternate packaging technology available? And you were there in that event. The answer was an astounding yes, we do have that. Then what is stopping us from deploying that? The cost. So when you are looking at an alternate technology, this is what I also said. It's not about you having an invention, you having an innovation, but how do you scale up the innovation so that it can have an impact? So today, a 1 rupee 50 paisa or a 2 rupee sachet to be sold in the market, the general perception of the industry is that it's going to be too difficult because we are looking at a 25% or a 50% increase in the cost. It's not going to be, market, it can't be viable in terms of. But today, the average consumer choices and the average consumer behavior in India has changed. Are we investing in capturing those kinds of behavioral changes from the industry? I think that is going to be a very, very critical and important question that all of us need to ask. So gone are the days that we are only looking at, is it 1 rupee or is it 2 rupees? Today, people are willing to put that an extra rupee if they see the value of that 50 paisa, 25 paisa, 1 rupee extra into what they are doing. So the important element of it is not just about how innovative we are, what kind of alternate we have, and what is that we are able to do, but how do we connect and communicate to that particular individual consumer that he or she will see the value of spending on sustainability. I think if that is one critical element that we can focus on from the industry, I think we certainly would have sort of addressed a significant part of the consumer behavior element of it. And certainly, again, there is also a reverse element there. It's not just the industry influencing the consumer, it's consumer also influences the industry. But that is where I think we need to be a little bit more open. We need to have our eyes and ears open to listen to those signals. And we have not just dozens, hundreds of businesses that actually have benefited not from their intervention of reaching out to the consumer, but listening to the consumer, hearing the consumer, and reverse engineering, their marketing, their product development, their innovations and investments into the market.
Thank you. I think in a way you have given us some points for our next summit also, what we should be doing. And of course, in preparation to that, and we have a team, which works closely on this subject, and they've been doing some research on consumer behaviors, and I'm sure we will come to you with what we learned from that. I want to give the chance to the audience now, if there is any question, and we will get a mic and we'll just take a few if you allow us. I know that we are towards the end of our time, but we will take maybe 2-3 questions. Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. I am Amruta from JSW Steel. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you on completing 20 years of Center of Excellence. This summit has been very insightful, especially for people like me who are new in this field. So, based on what I understood, the major goal of this summit is to create awareness on sustainability related practices, both in industrial and also in domestic usage. So, I was really curious. So, are we putting it into practice here at the summit? Like, are we using the notepads, pens, pencils, these table tents, etc.? They all seem to be brand new. So, are we using them with recycled materials, or are they new? And are you planning to use recycled materials in the next coming sessions? Please answer me, ma'am.
Sure. So yeah, we have not given you any agenda because it's all electronic, one thing, right? This is all recyclable as far as I know. My team can clarify if it is not, but this is fully recyclable. We take back this so that we can use it for our other events. There will be an announcement. The diary people should carry because they should not leave it here, otherwise we will take it back. Yes, this particular tent card that you noticed will be taken back and given for recycling. It's not made of recycled paper. That's how we are trying to do this. Any other question? Okay. Any question for Mr. Balakrishnan? Yeah. Okay. Any question for me? I would, because she had a question for me, so just checking if anybody further has any questions for CII. Okay, great. So obviously we are at the end of a very long summit, and we've had, yeah, there is a question. Okay. Okay.
Hello everyone, my name is Ashwini Rudeja from One Infiniting. I work on clean air with rural and tribal communities. So my question is for Mr. Balakrishna Pisupati. Sir, how can I work with you directly, because I'm a small, medium, micro enterprises. I do not know how to work with you directly. There might be a lot of NGOs, a lot of social sectors will be working with you directly, but I never got opportunity to connect with you. I'm available for work 24/7. Even during the night hours, 2 o'clock, you say, Ashwini, let's go for work. I'm ready. Thank you. No, I'm serious. I'm serious.
Sure.
On this.
No, I understand. Thank you. Thank you for the question. I'll certainly will give you my card, so you're most welcome to write. Because one of the things that we now have started working, at least from UNEP in India, is that, again, how much ever resources we have, we can't do everything. Environment is such a complex, but also a subject where you need 24/7 investments of time and minds and resources to doing it. But having sort of been very conscious of that particular fact, that our ability to make that change is limited unless we are able to work with partners, unless we are able to work with others who already, have a passion and an interest to work on it, will not be able to deliver much. So one of the fundamental things we are doing at UNEP is exactly to look at where we can have that larger partnerships. And in fact, again, I was talking to Ms. Sima, we actually are now launching a second phase of the air quality management initiative. I said it's not about how much we are going to be doing from UNEP on what to deal with it, but then CII has a whole program related to that. Is there anything that we can do together? So we don't have to first reinvent the wheel, but our ability to actually reach out is much higher than as UNEP we trying to do something individually or independently. So one of the fundamental philosophies with which we now start working is on how do we work with like-minded entities and colleagues. But having said that, there is also a little bit of a transaction cost. If I have 100 people sending me an email about wanting to connect, we will try to do it, but then there is a limitation. And that is why we always look for consortia. Even one of the elements that we actually sort of concluded as a part of the World Environment Day celebrations was that in all of it, our preference is to work with consortia so that we'll be able to get both the depth as well as the breadth of expertise and experience for us to move this forward, but more than happy to connect with you.
Thank you. Yes, in fact, I happen to see one of the magazines lying on the tables. I've gone through particularly on clean air. So my humble request to Seema ma'am that I would like to even join the clean air chapter. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the insights.
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, there's a question there. If Omkar, you can get the mic to that lady there, and before we have 3-4 minutes. Yeah.
Hello, sir and madam. My name is Vanashka, and I have just left my corporate job at McKinsey to follow my passion for sustainability. And my agenda to come to this convention was basically to explore the world of sustainability, which I'm just stepping into, and to identify the gaps that exist and find a direction basically. If I would like to utilize it to get some direct words of wisdom and guidance from you all. Thank you.
Thank you. I should say congratulations, because not many of us have the courage to do it. Thank you, and good luck with your passion. We actually run a major youth network, which is facilitated by UNEP. Started with actually working with youth on ending plastic pollution. It's called Tide Turner's Plastic Challenge. As a part of it, we actually have a network of about 750,000 youth across the country working with us on a number of different things. But always what fascinates me when, I hear a comment like what you mentioned, or when I speak to the youth, is that unlike us professionals coming together to discuss these issues because of our career choice, because of our domain expertise, because of our own experience of working on these issues, when the youth come together, they actually come together for the passion. That's why I always say addressing youth needs a very different kind of a skill, where you will have youth coming from banking background to finance background to environmental background to lawyers to people who actually are historians, people who actually have worked on It's actually a mix. It's such a heterogeneous mix of people who come together, but their interest is what is that we can do to make their lives better for tomorrow. So the first thing is connect, because there is so much that we can do as an individual, but there is so much more we can do when you're connecting with like-minded colleagues, like-minded groups, kind of a thing. And secondly, there are two dimensions to any of this. There is a dimension which is related to your interest and passion, but there is also a dimension which is personal and economic. Don't ignore that. That's very fundamental, because your ability to do service, your ability to deal with environment or sustainability should be based on your ability to earn and sustain your life also. So it should not be competing demands in terms of doing it, but how do you actually be able to work together so that there is no compromise that you are making between those two. But certainly a great initiative, great idea. But again, 2 points: connect with people and ensure that you balance. It's not the work-life balance, but it is also the environment-economic balance.
Thank you, Mr. Balakrishnan. I think with this, we are going to close the session. But before we close the session, I just need to probably mention a few points. One, I want to thank the audience, because you have been great. And I want to thank all our partners, all our sponsors who have made it possible for us to, do this summit. I also want to thank my team, tremendous team, which helps us put together this thing every year. And 20 years they've been doing it with me, so I want to thank each one of them. There's the power of partnerships, as we see. So I think we see a lot of partnerships, and our partners are represented there. One more partnership that we have is also with the corporate sector. CII has members. Our partner in this is the CII, with CII-ITC Center is ITC. I want to thank ITC for this, support, guidance, and for the belief that CII can actually make this happen. So when I said partners, we have members. We also have members who are doing work with us, so I want to thank them. They have taken a tremendous journey. And I think this is just the beginning, because I think sustainability, as you very beautifully articulated, means different things to different people. It also means that it's a journey. There is no end point. We reach milestones, we define new milestones, and we continue to grow. So I think this is what we keep doing. And with this, I'd like to pass it back to Shrajamoy, my colleague, who is going to formally end the session for us. Over to you, Shrajamoy. Thank you.
Thank you. Warm round of applause for this session, for the conversation that we have had. I would request the two of you to please step forward for a photograph. And I would request Ms. Seema Arora to please give a token of gratitude to Mr. Pisupati. Delegates, with this we conclude the 20th CII Global Sustainability Summit. A big thank you to all of you for making this summit a success. And I request you to join us for high tea. And a final request before leaving the venue, please drop your lanyard at the registration desk to allow us to reuse the lanyard for future events. Thank you.